Good evening. I'm Douglas Edwards, CBS News. Weather is a good deal less than flawless, and Columbia may not be able to take off on schedule tomorrow morning. Reed Collins reports from the Kennedy Space Center.
The pilot's old nemesis, weather, is toying with the second shuttle mission. There's a threat of rain overnight, and waves of clouds drift in from the Atlantic. Captain Donald Green, the mission weather officer, thinks there may be windows or launch opportunities in the morning.
It looks like we'll have these clouds in the next 24 hours or so. But looking at the satellite pictures, they're not continuous. There's a lot of breaks in them. So our job tonight will be to pinpoint the breaks, to calculate the onset and duration of these launch windows. And right now, we are real confident that we'll be able to give a launch window for weather for tomorrow.
After midnight, the huge external tank is to be filled with liquid hydrogen and oxygen, and rain would turn to ice on its frigid skin. But shuttle manager George Page wants to press ahead.
Based upon what we've heard so far in the weather, we will probably go ahead and load because I understand there's more weather coming later in the week, and our best chance may be tomorrow.
Astronauts Engel and Truly have done all they can. They practiced launch aborts in their shuttle trainer this morning, confessed to luncheon companions that they are concerned about the weather, and then they went to bed. Their day begins at 2:40 in the morning, and whether or not, they've got to be ready. Reed Collins, CBS News, Kennedy Space Center.
More news when the World Tonight continues.
Has been ready for its second ground trip into orbit, scheduled for blast off at 7:30 tomorrow morning, but launch officials are concerned about rainy, windy weather at the Cape, and right now there's a chance the flight will be delayed.
CBS News, New England gets its first popularly elected black mayor. I'm David Jackson reporting on the CBS Radio Network. The countdown to liftoff of the Space Shuttle Columbia resumed precisely on schedule a little less than an hour ago. The last major planned hold is over. The craft is ready for an early morning launch. The astronauts Engel and Truly are sleeping, so they'll be fresh when the time comes. The only possible problem now, the weather. Rain or even heavy overcast could postpone the mission.
Certain whether the space shuttle will be launched in the morning. There's a 30% chance of rain at Cape Canaveral. And Space Center spokesman Ken Fensinger says rain is definitely a factor.
Rain could damage the external, some of the tunnels on the orbiter during the ascent phase. The tunnels are quite fragile, and we don't want to expose the shuttle to rain at liftoff time.
Fensinger says NASA will make a liftoff decision overnight. You can hear live coverage of the shuttle launch Wednesday morning on many of these mutual stations.
Mutual News. Trial thrust of the Space Shuttle Columbia is in its final phase. Astronauts Joe Engel and Robert Truly will be awakened long before dawn, and if the weather permits, Columbia will fly again at 7:30 a.m. Eastern Time. You can hear live coverage of the launch over many of these mutual stations. The order shot and killed the former director of El Salvador's National Police Tuesday.
At Cape Canaveral, space agency officials with one eye on the weather say conditions thus far permit fueling of the Space Shuttle Columbia for Wednesday morning's scheduled launch. Though all have good excitement in and around the Cape for the shuttle launch, NBC correspondent Steve Porter says it can't quite compare with the April event simply because this will be the second mission. You don't see as many reference menu specials with the names of, let's say, astronaut specials or space special meals. You don't see the marquees outside of hotels listing parties for pre-launch, although a number of restaurants and hotels plan to stay open all night long. There's just not that hoopla that preceded that first launch. NBC correspondent Steve Porter in Jimmy Bay's...
Good evening. I'm Henry Lawson.
Rain will force a delay in blast-off. Rain could damage the external. Some of the tiles on the orbiter during the ascent phase. The tiles are quite fragile, and we don't want to expose the shuttle to rain at liftoff time.
Again, Fensinger says Air Force forecasters feel confident the weather will be okay for this morning's launch of the space shuttle. Hear live coverage of liftoff over many of these mutual stations.
Good morning, this is Reed Collins, CBS News at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, where the countdown clock is running, and this is the scene. It's dark at the Cape, and floodlights bathe the shuttle and its rocket system out there on the pad. The huge external tank's been filled with hydrogen and oxygen and inspected for ice formations. There are some rain squalls lurking in the Atlantic southeast of here, and they seem to be headed this way. The astronauts Joe Engel and Richard Truly were awake before 3 a.m. They had their steak and eggs breakfast in long tradition. They got into their spacesuits and then were driven over to the pad. Up an elevator 190 feet and on into the Columbia spacecraft itself. They plugged into the communication circuit and they talked to the Capcom, the communicator in the firing room.
Okay, copy that. Read you fine. PLP, OTC, air to ground 1. How do you read? OTC, PLP, I read you the same. Moving, wait for 3 clear. Copy.
And so the world heard the first business-like communication from Engel and Truly, hard at work, preparing for liftoff in a little more than an hour and a half from right now. Neither man has flown in space. Engel is an old X-15 test pilot, though. He's been 50 miles up several times, and that qualifies him as a sort of fringe of spaceman. Truly's been a Capcom, or mission control communicator, with a number of missions, including Skylab. Engel almost made the last Apollo flight to the moon, but he was bumped in favor of a geologist, Harrison Schmitt, who now is a United States Senator. Both Engel and Truly were crew members during two drop testings of the old Enterprise shuttle, the first one they made out at Edwards Air Force Base in California, Edwards being the primary landing point at mission's end next week. If there's some trouble after liftoff this morning, they also would use Edwards as an emergency landing strip after having circled the Earth once. There are several contingency ports. The astronauts could punch out if they desperately needed to and be ejected by explosive charges and parachute back to Earth. Then they would, what would happen, that nobody really knows. Nobody has a lot of confidence in that method. It could be tried, though, as high as 100,000 feet. A preferable abort is RTLS. You'll hear that spoken this morning. That's return to the landing site. Once rid of the solid rocket boosters and the big external fuel tank, they'd simply turn around and head back here and glide to the landing on the 15,000-foot strip, which is about 5 miles from the launch pad. Or if trouble strikes later in the boost phase, they fly across the Atlantic and head for the U.S. base at Rota, Spain, which is not far from Gibraltar. They're not banking on any of this happening now. The countdown clock is running toward liftoff time at 7:30 this morning. This is Reed Collins, CBS News at the Kennedy Space Center.
The countdown is continuing for a liftoff at 7:30 a.m. Eastern Time. And astronauts Joe Engel and Dick Truly have been up for several hours. To get a late update on what's happening now, we switch live to ABC's John Lyons at the Kennedy Space Center. Correct, the rain and clouds that kept us all out of the pool the past 2 days apparently will not destroy today's plans. The shuttle is ready to go. NASA expects heavy rain to stay south of us until well after launch. Astronaut Charles Bolden will cover this entire mission with us here at ABC News. Charlie, Engel and Truly are in Columbia. What are they doing?
Well, John, astronaut Ellison Onizuka, who is a closeout crew member, is now with Dick Truly and Joe Engel in the cockpit. He's going through some switch reconfigurations, and Dick and Joe are checking their cue card positions. making sure they have their ascent flip cards out, and they will go through an air-to-ground check with both launch control here and mission control back in Houston.
Would you like to be there?
I'd love to be there right now.
Astronaut Charles Bolden. Again, the countdown continues to run perfectly. If the rain holds off, we're expecting to see a launch about an hour and a half from now. Thank you very much. That's ABC's John Lyons live at the Kennedy Space Center. And, of course, ABC News will carry this morning's launch live with coverage beginning at 7:15 Eastern Time.
Good morning, this is Reed Collins, CBS News at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, where it now is first light, and we see a bank of dark clouds capping the southeastern horizon and moving this way, getting higher, getting cloudier. The weather's been an uncertain factor in the launch of Shuttle 2 for several days. It's uncertain this morning, where we have about an hour and 10 minutes before the scheduled liftoff time. The astronauts, the men of the hour, Engel and Truly, have been up since 2:40 this morning. They had their breakfast, they got into their space suits, and they've been in the Columbia shuttle now for the better part of an hour, going through communications checkouts, some of which you probably hear in the background. Everybody asks, what if? What if something goes wrong? Well, if something goes wrong early in the flight, they would eject, as you might in a modern jet aircraft, and parachute back to Earth. If something goes wrong a little later, and they'd like it later if at all, then they would simply glide back here, having gotten rid of the solid boosters and the big external tank. They'd land at a 15,000-foot landing strip about 5 miles from the launch site itself. If something goes wrong still later, they try to make it all the way across the Atlantic and into Rota, Spain, a U.S. air base over there, which is ready this morning. It's bright, sunny in Spain and the fine grape country down around Rota, which is not very far from the Rock of Gibraltar, and where our colleague William Lyon is standing by.
Officials here at Rota say that this is really highly unlikely. It would have to be a failure of some life support system, what one officer calls a hazard to life and limb. And in that unlikely event, there's an emergency team of 100, more than 100 personnel standing by here, landing and security people and medical specialists. There's a lot of interest on the base here. The American military personnel and their families are all following the Columbia flight with great interest and hoping it will just fly right over Rota without any trouble at all.
Well, that's the situation. Nobody expects trouble. If there is trouble later on, they could land conceivably in Okinawa, near Hickam Field in Hawaii. They could land at the Strip in New Mexico at White Sands, and they would try also for a landing at Edwards Air Force Base, which is their primary landing site at the end of this 5-day mission. All of those are contingencies. Right now, the main problem ahead is getting off, and getting off in good time. It's getting lighter as we speak. We see a little bit of yellow, a little bit of pink, one of those bright mornings it's going to be, but it's going to be cloudy too. The forecast is called for the possibility of rain through the night. It has rained south of here within the past hour. It's a little bit breezy, a little bit windy, and a little bit cloudy, and NASA will be playing it in real time to see if they can get off the ground in about an hour and 7 minutes. For now, Reed Collins, CBS News, Kennedy Space Center.
CBS News. Space Shuttle Columbia is fueled and ready for launch 30 minutes from now, but the weather may not cooperate. Good morning, I'm Christopher Graham reporting on the CBS Radio Network. The latest on Cape Canaveral from Reed Collins.
Some low-lying scudding across the Cape right now. More clouds than NASA wants for its second shuttle launch, but no decision's been made to delay the flight. The astronauts Engel and Truly are buttoned in the spacecraft, making the final communications checks. Astronaut John Young is airborne at the moment, seeking a vital piece of information, as spokesman Hugh Harris explains.
Commander John Young is flying the shuttle training aircraft at the present time, determining whether or not the weather is satisfactory for a return to launch site aboard. This is probably the most stringent requirement of the weather requirements we have.
In this, Young is returning a favor this morning. It was Engel who flew this exploratory flight for Young during the Space Shuttle's first voyage last April. Will the second voyage make it? Will it leave? It depends on the weather, which right now is not too promising, less than half an hour from the scheduled launch time. Reed Collins, CBS News, Kennedy Space Center.
And we'll have more when CBS News continues.
This is Reed Collins, CBS News at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, where the countdown is about to be resumed toward a little bit late launch of the Space Shuttle 2. It's not going to go at the half hour as originally planned. There was a brief delay to take a last-minute look at the weather. Now it's been decided, however, that they will attempt the countdown in a few minutes. It's now at T-9. The clock still isn't moving, however, and we're waiting to get the final definitive decision as to just exactly when, if, the Space Shuttle will be launched this morning. The clock is not moving yet. The determination still is being made about the weather. The astronauts, Angle and Cooley, already have been told farewell by the launch director. But now we're listening to an announcement. Let's get that.
As to why the clock was held, it was that the LOX load, the liquid oxygen load, was slightly out of limits. The managers feel that should not be a constraint to launch, and are doing further checks to determine when to pick up the count once again. At the present time, we're holding. Okay, we have an oxygen tank pressure, 1 PSI below the launch trajectory.
We're listening to the voice of Hugh Harris, the public affairs officer here at
It's been determined that the liquid oxygen tank pressure is 1
all three of those oxidizer cells for the fuel cells, those balls seem to be a little bit low. It was thought, too, for a time that the main oxygen tank in the big external fuel tank was low on oxygen as well. We're talking about pounds per square inch, not real volume, but pressure. Therefore, we're still waiting for the clock to be recycled and to count down from 9 minutes. This can be held in this configuration for the better part of an hour without losing any real time, without losing any facility. After 9 minutes, the whole shebang goes on a ground launch sequencer. After 5 minutes, the auxiliary power systems come on, and these things cannot be run for very long. They don't have that much fuel. So this is the optimum time to stand and hold and look at all of the systems before saying to the clock, go ahead and commit us to launch. No commitment has been made yet. We're at T-9 minutes. We're some 6 minutes beyond the scheduled launch time of Shuttle 2, and we're still holding here at the Cape, where the weather is extremely cloudy. The weather itself has been in doubt all morning. This is Reed Collins, CBS News at the Kennedy Space Center. 40 this morning. It was an early breakfast for them. It was a suiting up, getting into the space suits, getting their helmets adjusted. Then the ride in the van over here to Launch Pad 39A, this historic site from which men have left to the moon and from where the shuttle was first launched back in April. It's a repeat performance we're getting ready for here. There is cloud cover. Apparently the determination's been made. It won't be thick enough. It won't be heavy enough to stop them. Everything is go at 3 minutes 35 seconds to the scheduled liftoff of the first time that a space shuttle has been used for the second time. The second going, getting ready to go. Let's listen to the voice of Hugh Harris here. As we pick up the voice of mission control, he'll be telling us what's going on in the cockpit.
Normal needed power in the orbiter. T-minus 3 minutes, 12 seconds and counting. The profile checks of the aero surfaces have been completed and checked.
That big bird out there is carrying more weight, of course, than shuttle number 1 did. It has a plethora of experiments, including that remotely controlled arm built in Canada, shipped down here, now all tucked away in the cargo bay. They'll be operating that once in orbit. They're carrying some 17,000 more pounds of load than Shuttle 1 did. And because of this, they'll be flying a little bit lower, some 10 nautical miles lower in orbit. The angle of inclination to the equator has been pared down too, which means essentially that their ground track won't swing as far north and south of the equator as Shuttle 1 did. We're listening now. We're getting ready as we come up to 2 minutes and 21 seconds before launch.
Supply of oxygen and hydrogen have been terminated. T-minus 2 minutes, 15 seconds. The pressure in the liquid oxygen tank is at flight pressure.
The voice of Hugh Harris explaining to us what's going on over there on the launch pad a
Coming
couple of
up on
miles
the
away.
2-minute point.
The United States flag still is being whipped rather briskly as it stands on its standard in front of the turnaround basin, a slate gray patch of water which is whipped by winds which have consistently blown across here.
T-minus 1 minute, 40 seconds, and counting.
The countdown proceeding now inexorably, it would seem, toward liftoff time, toward the ignition time.
T-minus 1 minute, 30 seconds, and counting.
Up to 1:26 we are. 4.5 million pounds sitting out there on the launch pad, but there's more than 6.4 million pounds of thrust to lift it up.
17 seconds, and counting. The liquid hydrogen tank is at flight pressurization.
Coming alive, becoming self-sufficient now.
Coming up on the 1 minute point in our countdown. T-minus 1 minute and counting.
Men on their backs, in their flight suits, the visors on their helmets are down. They're looking at the weather more than anything. They're looking at that array of lights on the panel that will tell them, first, when they move, and secondly, how well they're going.
Seconds, T-minus 40 seconds. The development flight instrument recorders are on.
Minutes into
T-minus 35 seconds. We're just a few seconds away from switching control to the computer sequencer in the orbiter. T-minus 31 seconds, and we have held at the T-minus 31 second point.
Now we're listening to the Capcoms. They're troubleshooting.
An evaluation is being made as to why the countdown has held at the T-minus 31 second point. We believe that it is because the tanks on the fuel cells the pressure is not cleared with the redundant set sequencer.
So we seem to be back to the fuel cell situation that we spoke of.
We're ready to pick up the clock.
And you hear the voices
We're ready to
the Houston Space Center all over here.
31 seconds.
Clock still is not moving.
The clock did not resume.
It's all computerized now, and this is what launch directors don't like to get into, because when the computers say no, there's no way you can say go.
Why the clock did not pick up.
The APUs have been on now for some time. Those power units can't be run for too
The
long.
auxiliary power units are underway.
That's what Hugh Harris just repeated, telling us the power units themselves.
We have approximately a minute and 20 seconds remaining before we would have to recycle the APUs.
And that is a long and difficult process, and that would mean a considerable hold if the APUs, as they call the auxiliary power units, have to be refueled, recycled, or hot. They have to be cooled down. It takes a while.
Try once more. T-minus 31 seconds. We got a problem. We're back here. We did not have a resume of the clock and have had an indication that we have a possible problem with the software. It appears we are going to have to recycle.
And we'll be told shortly how long the recycle period may be. But the APU's running. It's, as we said, not an easy thing to do. It's not simply resetting the clock.
Launch Director George Page has just recommended that we go into our scrub turnaround procedure. The clock has stopped at the T-minus 31 second point, and a determination will be made as to why that occurred. The crew is in the process of turning around and going back to an appropriate hold time.
Anywhere from T-minus 9 minutes down.
We have a go for APU shutdown. The auxiliary power units are being shut down at the present time. This is the major time constraint which we have when we get into the last 5 minutes of the countdown. We have the capability with the fuel on board for the APUs to have one more attempt today. If we should not succeed once we have started those APUs again, then we would have to scrub for at least 48 hours because we have put the cryogenic propellant in the external tank. At the present time, however, no determination has been made as to precisely where we are recycling to, or whether we will be able to get the clock started once again. We are going back to the T-minus 9-minute point in the countdown at this particular point.
If you have to cool down the APUs that we've suddenly been focusing on, it takes about an hour and a half just to do that. So we could be here for quite some time. We're hearing more communication now with the spacecraft. We just heard Dan Vandenstein tell the men up there, open your visors. That means they can relax for a little time until the troubleshooting is continuing.
His visor, and he and Commander Joe Engel are in the process of reconfiguring these switches inside the orbiter for a return to the T-minus 9-minute point in our countdown.
That's the situation here at the Cape. It wasn't the weather after all. It was a series of small, nagging problems. They thought it might be the software. They thought it might be the oxygen pressure inside the fuel cells. It could be a number of things. The reconfiguration of the switches has now been completed, and they'll wait until they can decide it's T-minus 9 minutes again. But how long it takes to get to that T-minus 9-minute mark, we don't know. It could be a considerable period of time. They'll make one more effort, though, God willing, to try to get it off the ground sometime today. For now, this is Reed Collins, CBS News.
Space Shuttle Columbia is still on the launch pad at Cape Canaveral, and they're still holding. Reed Collins reports.
The countdown was delayed by a series of little problems that finally became big ones. The countdown clock got to 31 seconds before liftoff when the computers that orchestrate the final moments prior to launch simply stopped the clock. There was hurried communication along the circuits. The power units that guide the bird in flight were already turned on, and they can operate for short periods of time only, so they were turned off, and it will take at least 45 minutes to recycle them. An attempt will be made to launch yet today, but if that fails, there may well be a delay of 2 full days, and the weather forecast for the coming days is threatening. Reed Collins, CBS News, Kennedy Space Center.
The Soviet Union today launched another unmanned space probe toward Venus, the second in less than a week. TASS says that both are expected to reach the vicinity of Venus next March.
Mutual News, so near and yet so far. With just 30 seconds left in the launch countdown for the space shuttle, the Columbia's computer brought everything to a halt. Best guess now is there is a problem in the computer system's software, but the development has delayed the launch for well over an hour at least. Mutual's Jim Slade has a report from the Kennedy Space Center.
NASA engineers are huddling in the Launch Control Center deciding just where the problem started. They've recycled the official clock to about 20 minutes to liftoff as a place to resume if they decide to pick it up again later today. There are several things for them to do. They have to learn the problem, pick a time, and give enough time to cool down auxiliary power units inside the spacecraft so they can be started again. On top of that, the unit which steers the spacecraft through launch has to be recalibrated, and that alone takes about 51 minutes. If everything goes exactly as it should, they are at least an hour and 15 minutes from the earliest possible launch. Jim Slade, Mutual News, the Kennedy Space Center.
Mutual News will cover the launch of the space shuttle live whenever it occurs. This CBS News. 31 seconds before liftoff, the second space shuttle mission was halted this morning, delayed by a computer problem. Good morning, I'm Christopher Glenn, reporting on the CBS Radio Network. The story now from Steve Young at Mission Control in Houston.
The first problem occurred this morning during a built-in hold on the countdown to blast off at T-minus 9 minutes. Liquid oxygen pressure in the fuel cells was registering slightly low. The decision was made to go ahead anyway. The count resumed, but the automatic flight sequencer stopped at T-minus 31 seconds. The people in firing room 1 at Cape Canaveral couldn't figure out how to get the count to resume. The thinking here, and it's still unofficial, is that one of the 19 mini-computers that feed the main flight sequencer at the Cape rigidly ruled that the low liquid oxygen pressure reading was reason enough to order a scrub. In other words, man was willing to go, but because of inflexible programming, one of the ground computers said no. The crew in the capsule, still on their backs, asked a few minutes ago when they would get clarification. Thus far, they have not gotten any official word. They're recycling Columbia to make a second attempt at launch today. They've been cooling down the equipment on board that provides power to the motors that swivels shuttle's rocket engines so its flight trajectory can be controlled. A second launch attempt could occur within the next hour. One bright note, the weather is improving. Steve Young, CBS News, Johnson Space Center, Houston.
More when CBS News continues. Okay, we're still in a whole situation over at the Cape on the Space Shuttle Columbia launch. Technical difficulties. It appears that they may have scrubbed for the day. We don't know that. We don't know that for sure, but it just appears that way. We will keep you posted. You can be an ear witness when and if Columbia goes. All right.
Another try to get the Space Shuttle Columbia off the pad at Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Mutual's Jim Slade has the latest. Launch Director George Page has decided to resume the countdown, restarting at 9:35 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. There will be another built-in hold at 9 minutes to liftoff to give the people here time to reconnoiter and, if necessary, to stretch things out even further. But as it stands, with the count restarting at 9:35 a.m. Eastern Time, the very earliest the shuttle could fly this morning would be 10:05 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Jim Slade, Mutual News, the Kennedy Space Center.
The countdown got to 31 seconds before launch earlier this morning before the system's computers sensed something was amiss and brought things to a halt. The delay forced several functions to be recycled. Just what was wrong still isn't clear. The best guess is the problem was in the programming of the 5 computers involved. This is news from Mutual Radio. Kurt Henschen reporting.
That's the commander of the flight. That's Joe Engle. And they're going to have to start shutting it down.
Recommend sequence 16 with 1 modification. You want that? Okay, and since we've got A1, the first density is temporary.
So that's the communication that's going on with the spacecraft as the astronauts Engle and Truly begin to shut it down for at least probably 48 hours. I believe that's what the mission rules are going to take. And mainly this is to resupply the APUs, or the auxiliary power units, that supply the hydraulic power that moves the gimbals that swivel the engines around during flight. Also, the APUs are used to supply the power to the control surfaces of the spacecraft itself when it's flying and gliding back like an airplane. So the second flight of the space shuttle is not to be today. This postponement probably will be 48 hours, 2 days' time. The weather forecast in the next couple of days has not been very bright either, so we'll have to wait and see. This mission was scrubbed, you know, from early October because of the difficulty with the fuel spilling on the tiles. It was then reset for November 4th. NASA has stuck to this date through thick and thin. The countdown went smoothly until just a few minutes before launch, till around the T-minus 9 minute point. Then when it got to T-minus 31 seconds, what is believed to be a computer software problem sensed that something was wrong. It was unable to be masked. It was unable to be fooled. And the computer, which runs this flight and runs so much of our world, said no, and no it is for the shuttle today. This is Reed Collins, CBS News at the Kennedy Space Center.
Is 9.
CBS News. The second mission of the Space Shuttle Columbia is put off until another day, possibly Friday. I'm Jay Jones reporting on the CBS Radio Network. All seemed to be ready this morning at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. The weather was cloudy, but space officials decided conditions were no threat to launch, and the countdown crept on to 31 seconds before liftoff. And there it stopped. A problem developed. The story from Reed Collins.
Columbia was 31 seconds from liftoff when the computers that orchestrate the complex series of events refused to continue and stop the clock. A couple of hours passed. Joe Engel and Richard Truly waited patiently up in the Columbia's cockpit. The countdown clock was started again, but the oil pressure in two of the onboard auxiliary power units showed high. And then NASA decided to call it quits.
At the present time, we have scrubbed for the day. It will be at least 48 hours before we can reschedule. It could be longer depending on what the problem is with the auxiliary power unit and how long it's determined it will take to fix that.
That official announcement was greeted by groans from the crowds here at the Cape, where incidentally the sun is shining for the first time today. Reed Collins, CBS News, Kennedy Space Center.
The Russians today launched another unmanned spacecraft toward Venus, the second in 6 days. Both should reach the planet next March. More when CBS News continues.
CBS News. After its victory on the AWACS sale, the administration appears to take a step back. I'm Richard C. Hartlett reporting on the CBS Radio Network. Yes, on the countdown clock, the second launch of the Space Shuttle Columbia was scrubbed this morning until Friday at the earliest. Space officials are studying two problems: whether the oil pressure was too high in the Columbia's auxiliary units and why computers halted the automatic flight sequencer at T-minus 31 seconds.
CBS News. NASA shed some light on the reasons for today's scrub of the Space Shuttle launch. I'm Paul Lockwood reporting on the CBS Radio Network. The latest from the Johnson Space Center in Houston and correspondent Steve Young.
The space agency says one of the reasons it was forced to scrub the launch this morning was that it didn't bother to change the oil after the last flight of the shuttle Columbia. Contamination in the old oil is the suspected cause of clogged filters and high oil pressure in two of the shuttle's three auxiliary power units, which provide hydraulic steering power. Officials don't know yet how extensive the maintenance procedure will be or whether it can be accomplished by Friday, the earliest possible opportunity to try a launch again. But today's major problem was in computer programming. A flight sequencing computer on the ground didn't fully get the message that a decision had been made to slightly bend the rules governing how much liquid oxygen pressure is required in the onboard fuel cells in order for the count to proceed to liftoff. Steve Young, CBS News, Johnson Space Center, Houston.
The Reagan administration has decided to withdraw U.S. participation in a program that would establish a satellite system for 21 Arab and African nations. Secretary of State Haig said the proposal is being withdrawn to allow time for additional consultation with the Congress. Other participants in the project are Libya, South Yemen, and the Palestine Liberation Organization. More news after this. New Jersey voters still don't know for sure who their next governor will be following yesterday's election. This is Doug Poling reporting on the CBS Radio Network. It'll be at least a week until another attempt is made to achieve the second launch of the Space Shuttle Columbia. This morning's scheduled launch from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida was scrubbed with just 31 seconds remaining in the countdown. Another problem forced the halt of the countdown, but officials then decided that an oil contamination problem was severe enough to postpone the launch. Now this.
CBS News. Sweden prepares to release a Soviet submarine held for 10 days. Good morning. I'm Christopher Glenn, reporting on the CBS Radio Network. The Space Shuttle Columbia today, they say it will take at least a week to repair clogged oil filters. The exact time of a second scheduled liftoff has not yet been set. Orbital Flight Test Manager Deke Slayton on the CBS News broadcast Morning describes what astronauts Engel and Truly will be doing in the meantime.
Well, we used to have delays, and we'd most likely, if we decide it's about the 7-day ballpark, go back to Houston and do some more simulations back there, and come back into the Cape area about 2 days ahead of launch and pick right up where we left off. So it's just a little more training to kind of keep tuned up and ready to go, primarily entries and launches.
Shuttle Test Manager Deke Slayton.
CBS News. The Space Shuttle launch is on again. This time it's set for 7:30 a.m. Eastern Time, Thursday. I'm Judy Muller, reporting on the CBS Radio Network. NASA officials made the decision after running some tests on power units that halted the launch attempt on Wednesday of last week. Dick Young, a NASA spokesman, explains the decision.
It was based upon a complete inspection and evaluation of the situations on the two auxiliary power units that gave them some concern on Wednesday. They drained and purged the lubricant in there. They changed out the filters, and they analyzed the nature of what was felt to be a contaminant. So they have determined they have solved the problem. They're going to proceed with launch.
The new date has been passed to astronauts Joe Engel and Richard Truly, who were at the Johnson Space Center in Houston. They came within 31 seconds of flying Columbia on her second mission last week. The countdown begins once again, 8 a.m. Eastern Time, Tuesday. More news in a minute.
NBC News. This is Don.
Clear Lake City, which is a Houston suburb nearest the Johnson Space Center, is getting set to receive the crush of people that accompany a major space activity in the next couple of days. But this is a day of major inactivity. The motels down Route 1 are forward advertising Sunday brunch with 2 takers so far. The new Mexican restaurant replaced the failed French restaurant since shuttle mission number 1 has yet to toss its first chili pepper for the day. The astronauts and the flight director's team all have the day off with their families. The parking lot is available for touch football. There's breaking news at the Johnson Space Center, Houston.
New York police. I'm Bob Hart, American Contemporary Radio. In just a few minutes from now, astronauts Joe Engel and Richard Truly are supposed to leave the Space Center in Houston and head for that Florida launch pad to get set for Thursday's blastoff. Right now, weather is the only question mark. Will it be good enough for a launch come Thursday? Partly cloudy is the forecast. Last week, when they tried to launch Columbia, another astronaut flew into the clouds to check on the weather. And ABC's Bill Cummins says he caused a bit of a stir.
Astronaut John Young almost found himself in the hot seat last week when a military air traffic controller in Jacksonville spotted an unidentified blip on his radar scope. Knowing that Cuban aircraft have tried to intrude on U.S. airspace, the controller scrambled 2 armed F-106 fighters to intercept. When the fighters finally made the interception, they discovered that the blip was John Young in a shuttle training aircraft flying near Kennedy Space Center checking weather for the space shuttle launch. The military controller hadn't been told that there was a launch that morning or that Young would be flying to check the weather. Bill Cummins, ABC News at the Kennedy Space Center.
Spotting an astronaut is one thing, a drug smuggler quite another. That story coming up.
Stations in Texas, including Houston. Countdown is continuing at Cape Canaveral, and blastoff so far is still set for 7:30 tomorrow morning. But an instrument failure and a possible fuel leak have engineers concerned. NASA has scheduled a news conference at this hour to explain what's going on, and Reed Collins tells us what's known so far.
A couple of problems have cropped up on Launch Pad 39A. Gaseous nitrogen, used to keep the big external tank clean and ready for its liquid hydrogen fuel, has been varying in pressure. And the Columbia system for telling the ground how it's doing in flight has a bug in it. A pulse code modulator failed in the craft overnight. A new one was flown in from Houston. It too has failed, and the experts think it may be something else in the circuit that's causing the failures. That system must be absolutely perfect before launch, and the troubleshooting at the pad continues. Reed Collins, CBS News, Kennedy Space Center.
More news in a minute. Ohio received a significant drop in fuel pressure could cause another delay in the launch. But NASA says the leak has been stopped, leaving one other glitch to be dealt with, a malfunction in the space-to-ground data analysis system. But NASA spokesman Michael Weeks says the cause of the problem has been traced, and all should be go for the 7:30 a.m. liftoff tomorrow. On
The launch, originally set for 7:30 Eastern Time tomorrow morning, has now been delayed until about 10 o'clock. Tonight, replacement data relay systems are being flown to Cape Canaveral from California, and officials say they need the extra time to make sure the new units are working before the countdown can proceed. NASA press officer Ann Skinner explains the nature of the malfunction.
The problem that we're working on now is with a unit called the multiplexer demultiplexer in the orbiter. A portion of one of the units has been operating only intermittently. This unit takes information from the various sensing systems on the orbiter and in the payload bay and converts it into a form that can be used by another device called the pulse code modulator and sent to ground stations and to the orbiter's own computer.
The weather, which for a while was considered a possible problem, now appears to be cooperating, and officials remain optimistic the Columbia will be launched tomorrow morning. CBS News continues in a moment.
From the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, I'm Keith Berman, American Contemporary Radio. They have resumed the final countdown with blast-off of the Space Shuttle Columbia, now scheduled for 10 a.m. Eastern Time. The launch time had been moved back 2.5 hours so NASA engineers could correct some data processing problems aboard the orbiter. Live with me on the line now is ABC's John Lyons. John, how did they finally fix that glitch?
Basically, Keith, by cannibalizing Challenger. Challenger is the next shuttle, and it's in a factory out in Palmdale, California. They went out and removed a box called a MDM, modulator demodulator. It's about as big as maybe a six-pack of soda. Brought that out here, flew it out here, and then plugged it in, and it works, and everything's ready to go.
Oh, that's super. That's John Lyons with me down at Cape Kennedy. Astronauts Engel and Truly are to be awakened at 5:10 a.m. They'll have breakfast then, enter the Columbia's cockpit for their pre-flight checkout at about 8 a.m. We're told the weather forecast is good, only some scattered clouds expected at lunchtime. Looks like this time they're going. As far as the White House is concerned, the Stockman quotes are a closed issue. That story coming up.
NBC News. I'm Steve Porter at the Kennedy Space Center. It's looking beautiful. The Columbia's huge external fuel tank has been filled. The weather is perfect, hardly a cloud in the sky, and the crews are getting ready to suit up. Everything here at the Cape pointing toward a launch at 10 a.m. Eastern Time, just about 3 hours from now. The go-ahead was given last night after a cantankerous data sending unit was replaced. NBC's Jay Barbary is here with what happened. Jay?
Steve, the Columbia survived launch eve gremlins when a Sabre jetliner winged its way across country carrying a part scavenged from the shuttle's half-built sister ship, Challenger. The part, a data relay unit, landed here at 9:02 p.m. Eastern Time, with engineers pleading for technicians not to drop the 36-pound device. Actually, 2 of the units were flown in just in case one didn't work. The data relay device converts flight information into digital language for computers. It was installed in time for the countdown to be picked up for the 10 a.m. Eastern Time launch. Steve?
The crew's breakfast this morning was quite a spectacle. The room decorated with crepe paper and a big happy birthday sign hung behind the crew's table. This is Dick Truly's 44th birthday, and after a lot of jokes, including cake candles that would relight after Truly blew them out, fellow crew member Joe Engel and the others in the room sang happy birthday. So it's T-minus 2 hours and 5 minutes and holding a scheduled hold with everything go for launch. Mike Moss will have more news in a minute.
Time for CBS News Roundup.
The Shuttle Columbia ready to go. The president and some Republicans joust on the budget. A possible signal from Israel in the Middle East. U.S. diplomat fired upon in France. Good morning. This is David Jackson with the CBS World News Roundup. Delayed but undaunted, the space shuttle, its crew, and the launch team at Cape Canaveral are ready to go. Liftoff scheduled in 2 hours. Reed Collins has the latest.
The spacecraft Columbia is poised for its second trip into space with a black box borrowed from its younger sister, the Shuttle Challenger. The borrowed box, flown here last night from California, due to processing problems, which had forced a 2.5-hour delay in this morning's launch. It meant 2.5 hours extra sleep for astronauts Joseph Engel and Richard Truly. This is Truly's 44th birthday, and there was a birthday party complete with candles at breakfast. Photographers sang happy birthday as he climbed into the van that took him to the launch pad. And as they entered the spacecraft, there was a sign on the threshold reading, again, happy birthday. Truly also is the first astronaut grandfather to be sent into space. It is a bright, virtually cloudless morning here at the Cape. Weather in the contingency landing areas around the world is acceptable. The tracking network is green and go. The main tank is filled. And the one-owner Columbia is ready to go again. Reed Collins, CBS News, Kennedy Space Center.
The bird watchers that flock to the Cape for major launches are on scene for Shuttle 2, but police say there aren't as many on hand now as there were last week. Personal schedules sometimes are more inflexible than rocket launches. Police estimate that between 100,000 and 200,000 are on hand this morning. There were some 300,000 spectators there last Wednesday when the launch was scrubbed, to most everyone's disappointment. But apparently, most of the space buffs are a determined lot. A California couple drove in from California in their camper. They say they were at Edwards Air Force Base in April for the landing of Shuttle 1. They say it was the biggest thrill of their lives, so they decided to trek east to watch the liftoff of the Columbia's second mission. They were on hand last week, hung on till now, saying they'll wait as long as they must. There's a retired policeman from Germany. He says he watched the first shuttle mission on television back home. This one he wants to see firsthand. Waiting for the event, those few minutes that the bird watchers will be able to see the huge rocket as it rises into the sky, apparently is not as boring as some might think. Most of the people come in campers with all the comforts of home. A South Carolinian says he's enjoying the whole thing. Been there a week now, he says, just fishing and drinking.
The flight of Shuttle 2. This is Reed Collins, CBS News at the Kennedy Space Center, where we have 1 hour and 10 minutes to go until liftoff, and the count has been going well. Truly and Engel have been in the spacecraft for more than an hour now. They're locked inside, going through checks, and the problems that plagued the launch crews through the night have evaporated like the early dew here at the Cape, where a bright sun is now blazing away, and a northwest breeze is flapping the flag out in front of us, in front of the turnaround boat basin, that little patch of water that stands between us and launch pad 39A. Several hundred miles between us and the nexus, or the nerve center of all of this launch business, which is the Manned Spacecraft Center in Houston, Texas, where my colleague Steve Young is standing by this morning. Good morning, Steve.
Good morning, Reed. They really don't know what went wrong in those black boxes that they changed out or replaced. They say they'll do an analysis after the thing gets off the ground, and they seem pretty confident this morning. There was a radar problem in Bermuda that turned out to be a problem not with the radar equipment itself, but with the interconnecting communications links. A hoop went up a couple of minutes ago as they were here watching the closeout crew, because one of the fellows with his back to the TV camera was wearing the old NASA insignia, what they call the meatball, and they put up a cheer for the meatball instead of the present logo, which they call the worm. It's kind of a squiggly thing.
That spells out NASA in what looks to be like computerese language or something modern nowadays. Well, the worm is up there, a man in space coveralls who's helping the closeout crew, the people who assist the astronauts to get inside the cockpit and get all configured in there. Many of them are Rockwell employees, and they're allowed to have the corporate insignia on their backs. A familiar scene, and one which was enacted only a week ago. What's the feeling at Mission Control in Houston about the chances for this flight? Is there an affirmative feeling that you get?
Well, you get smart answers to questions, by which I mean simply responsive answers, and I think there is an affirmative, a positive attitude this morning. They were kind of on edge last night, but they're raring to go, and I think expecting to go this morning.
I suppose it's not rare for Columbia, the elder sister, to borrow some equipment for going out with from an earlier younger sister, the spacecraft Challenger. In American society, that's done quite frequently. The black box that Steve referred to is a data processing piece of equipment that goes up in the forward cockpit area. A couple of them didn't seem to work. They seemed to have the same failures when they were tried, and so they sent from the Cape all the way to California. And the next spacecraft, Challenger, surrendered its black box in order that the Columbia could attempt that second trip into space this morning. This is Reed Collins, CBS News at the Kennedy Space Center.
Is an hour away from liftoff. The space shuttle is fueled and the astronauts are in the cockpit. Good morning. I'm Charles Osgood reporting on the CBS Radio Network. The latest at the Kennedy Space Center from Reed Collins.
And with an hour to go, it is go here at the Cape. The astronauts have been up in the spacecraft Columbia checking out the systems for the better part of an hour, communicating with the ground. The sun is well up from the rim of the Atlantic Ocean, and there are some faint watercolor clouds moving around the horizon, but the weather here is well within the launch limits. Shortly, astronaut John Young will take off in the shuttle training plane to test the winds aloft, a mission performed by Joe Engle when Young made the maiden voyage in Columbia last April. Young will test the nearby emergency runway where the Columbia would land if there's any trouble during the first moments of launch, which are now less than 1 hour away. Reed Collins, CBS News at the Kennedy Space Center.
More news after this.
This is Reed Collins, CBS News at the Kennedy Space Center. With some 40 minutes to lift off, Engle and Truly have been given the essential flight information, items that all pilots need in case they have to return to the launch site here and use the emergency runway.
Roger, I read you loud and clear, and I have an altimeter setting for you of 30.01. There'll be runway 33, and one change to the cue card on the RTLS winds. Change the 7,000-foot wind to read 36020.
Okay, Dan, we got that. Thank you, sir.
Roger, and that completes our practice. We'll see you in the air.
You bet.
You bet. Well, they'll take the south to north runway. There's only one here. It's designated number 33 if you take it in from the south going north. There's another emergency strip over on Okinawa, which could be used, but as Arlene Silver reports, not a whole lot's been made ready there in that far Pacific.
No one expects the shuttle to come down at Kadena, so almost nothing's been done to prepare for an emergency landing here. No additional people, no special training, not even one NASA official anywhere on the 11,000-acre base. The major in charge of public information here says if the shuttle is forced to land at Kadena, the Air Force will treat it like any other emergency landing, using its own equipment and its own people. When asked about the special procedures for shutdown to make the shuttle safe after landing, the major said no one on base knows anything about them, but if the shuttle comes down at Kadena, he's sure that a plane load of NASA people will be right behind it.
That's the situation as we hear from Okinawa on Kadena Air Base, which is one of the contingency landing areas. The main area concerned with the flight portion of the mission is Mission Control in Houston, Texas. My colleague Steve Young's been there. Steve, is everybody ready?
They are ready, Reed, and as you know, from about 7 seconds after the rocket and the external tanks and the whole assembly begin to move, control moves to here. They are at this point monitoring all the systems, and they have expressed no concern about any of the hundreds, indeed thousands of systems. They seem positive, upbeat. Chris Kraft, director of the Johnson Space Center, is intent, we're told. We didn't get any other words describing his attitude, but they're going to go, they say.
Well, Steve, it looks as if everybody's going to go here, too, because the weather couldn't be any better, we suppose, for this kind of launch. Although, as you look ahead, and we still have some 38 minutes to go until liftoff, There is a bank of clouds that's forming in the Atlantic area to the east and is moving here just a little bit. But this is not believed that this will constrain the launch. This is Reed Collins, CBS News at the Kennedy Space Center.
Good morning, I'm Ben Ball.